Hey guys, Jay Sini here and welcome to another episode on the Australian Wealth channel. And today we are going to be reacting to Andre Jik's video on how much house you should buy. Okay, so in this video, we're going to be reacting to a video from Andre Jik, which was just posted very recently. If you haven't heard of him, he's a well-known finance YouTuber. Like Graham Stephan, Meet Kevin, and Jeremy. I watch his content. He's got some great stuff. Now, he's obviously talking about the American market. I obviously live in Australia, as you can tell by my accent. Our situations here are a little bit different, so I thought it'd be really interesting to compare the American market to the Australian market and see some of the things that are the same and some of the things that are different. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Hey money, how much house can I afford? Curled up into a fetal position.
So that's something else that I really like about Andre is it's not just finance. You know, he's obviously doing a lot of really cool stuff and magic tricks. So I think it's really entertaining for the viewers.
I know how you feel, money. I know how you feel.
I know how you feel too.
I'm sorry. That was a comment that wins the internet. That was the comment from Elysium. Thank you. That's how that trick should have been presented in the first place. But anyway, today I wanted to talk about how much house we can afford to buy. I feel like as a YouTuber, if I could call myself that oddly enough, we make videos that are largely relevant to our lives about the things that we are currently experiencing the moment that we're going through them.
I don't know if you guys caught that, but he did a very interesting editing technique when he started to talk about providing value for other people. And you might have seen there was a very subtle pan in, and what that does is it helps to draw your attention in. So not only does he know a fair bit about finance, he knows a lot about increasing engagement. So something to keep note of.
And lately, for the past 6 months of my life, I have been seriously looking to buy a house. Mostly because my money is just basically burning a hole in my wallet. Yes, I did that again, but also because I want to invest in real estate, but I've never bought a house before, and there's a few questions that I need answered in this video, like, are house prices going to continue going up because of low inventory and low interest rate environment? Or should I borrow a ton of money because I know that money tomorrow will be worth a lot less than money today, so I'm shorting the dollar because of inflation? And should Californians really be moving out here? I'm just kidding. I don't have anything against Californians other than how they drive.
So I think that there's a lot of really interesting questions that were just raised there. Should I buy a house? Is it going to continue to appreciate in price over time? Well, one thing is that they are not making any more land. So what we have here on Earth is basically what we've got. Obviously new developments are getting opened up, but I think if you're looking at a really long time frame, such as 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, you'll continue to see prices appreciate as we have seen for basically all of humanity. So I think for Andre, if he was going to be staying in Las Vegas, then I think it's probably a great idea to be buying real estate, especially in that particular city. A lot of Californians are moving out to Las Vegas because there's no tax. So there's no state income tax, I should say. Of course you have federal taxes, but of course it's much more attractive than a place like California, which has insanely high taxes on people that are earning a lot of money. So I think if you're looking at a long time scale, it's probably a great idea to be buying a house.
Hi, my name is Andre Jik. Hope you're feeling well, hope you're doing great, and I want to share something really interesting with you. In Soviet Russia, like button smash you.
And in Australia, we smash beers.
What that came from. In 2019, the median household income was reported to be the highest that it's ever been at $68,703. But according to house price data, in Q2 of 2020, the median household purchase price of a home was actually $313,200. That means that people are spending 4.5 times their annual salary on their home. And that means that it's about at the top of the affordability scale. And house prices have been increasing faster and faster.
Okay, we need to stop right there and talk about Australia. So the median income in Australia is about $45,000, which is lower than America. This is, of course, in Australian dollars I'm talking. Now, the average house price in Australia is nowhere near that. The average house price in Australia is $809,000. So what we can see here in Australia is that affordability is even more drastic than what it is in America. If the median income's $45,000 and the average house price is worth $800,000, there is a massive disparity compared to what you can see in America.
And there's two major reasons for this. Now, the first reason is because inventory is extremely low. Take a look at this graph that shows the housing inventory in the last 5 years. The last time it was this bad was in 2003, and even then, it wasn't quite this bad. And the second reason is because of the low interest rates. Take a look at this graph that shows interest rates in the last 50 years. It shows that interest rates are sliding lower and lower, and we're currently sitting at 2.8%. Now that means that more and more people can now afford to buy more and more house.
Okay, so in regards to interest rates, for quite some time the interest rates in Australia were a little bit lower than they were in the States, but what we've seen during this pandemic is not only Australia continuing to cut a little bit, but they've also cut considerably in the US. So we're starting to see somewhat comparable rates. I know in Australia, my current home loan is 2.8. We're getting that refinanced. I've seen it at 2.5, and I've even seen one bank that's offering a mortgage rate of 1.99%, which is incredibly low. So I guess interest rates are somewhat comparable at the moment between Australia and the US.
So people are buying more and more house.
We've also seen that in Australia.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. So today, more than ever, I think it's really important to talk about how much house people can actually afford. So I'll just share with you right away the actual traditional method that we're told to follow, and then I'll tell you the real method that people that are financial nerds like to use when watching these videos. You nerd. So the first method is to take your monthly income and multiply it by 0.28.
Okay, my monthly income. Okay, so 500,000 divided by 2.8. Great, God, of course, I don't make 500,000 a month. Hey, I'd love to. Maybe one day, we'll see. Only if you smash the like button though.
So take me for example. When I was earning $50,000 per year before YouTube, that converts to a monthly income of $4,167 a month. And if we multiply that by 0.28, we get $1,167 a month. So if my mortgage payment can fall within that range or lower, then that means I can technically afford the house.
Okay, so if we run this for Australia, the median income is about $48,000. So the middle income earners on roughly $48,000. So if we divide that by 12, then what we are getting is our monthly figure, which is $4,000 a month. Now, if we times this by 0.28, so what that means is you're going to be getting a mortgage rate of $1,120. Okay, so I've just run some calculations on repayments. So I've taken the average interest rate in Australia at the moment, which is 2.69%. So if you were going to be repaying 2.69% interest on your mortgage and you were doing that off the median income, then you would be able to borrow $250,000 approximately. Now, getting a property in Australia for like $250,000 plus your down payment, so like let's say $300,000. It's a little bit less than that, but $300,000 is not achievable unless you are living in a shack in the middle of nowhere. I live about an hour from the center of Sydney, and I currently live in a house that's roughly worth $900,000. Now, there are of course some cheaper options. I've seen some houses come up in my particular area for about $500,000, maybe $450,000, but these are completely run down, completely busted, and need a lot of work to get them to a standard that is really even livable. So I think trying to find something for $300,000 in Australia, anywhere near the capital cities, is just not going to be achievable, especially in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane.
Which is at roughly 5 times my salary, or $250,000 for the home. But there's also one extra step. Now, if you want to increase your chances for getting a loan, you want to make sure that your DTI is 36% or less. Now, DTI, as the kids on Tinder like to say, is down to invest. Hey girl, you DTI?
I'm always down to invest.
Now it means debt to income ratio. And what it is they will look at all your debts across the board, like your student loans, your auto loans, your credit card debts, outstanding gambling debts if you live here in Vegas, and they'll add all that up, including the mortgage payment, and they will divide that number by your monthly gross income, which is income that you earn before paying taxes. And if it's 36% or less, then there's a good chance they will approve you on the loan. But don't forget to include the most important costs as well, and that's those little monthly additional costs like HOAs, which here in Las Vegas are literally one of the most corrupt organizations you'll ever find. You'll also have to include your property taxes, which are typically 1% of the purchase price of the home, as well as your homeowner's insurance. And if you're actually buying a house, don't forget to include the closing costs, which are anywhere between 2 to 5% of the home purchase price, as well as maintenance costs, which are 1% of the purchase price per year, or $1 per square foot per year.
Okay, so something else that I think is really important to note, I'm not sure if they have it in the US, but in Australia, we also have something called stamp duty, which I think is the worst tax ever to exist. And it puts especially first home buyers at such a disadvantage. Now, what this is basically is when you want to buy a piece of land or a property that's on a piece of land, you're forced to pay an additional tax. So if you want to purchase a property in Australia that's worth roughly the median price, which is $850,000, then you are looking at stamp duty of $46,000 on top of your deposit, which is a lot of money, especially for people that are just getting into the market.
Those two that you use, it's gonna come out to be about the same. Super important to remember though, a lender's job is very similar to a minimum wage employer. If you ever worked one of those jobs, you'll know that it's basically a way for them to tell us, look, I would love to pay you less, except that would be illegal. So similarly, a lender or a banker's job is to give us as much debt and as much money as possible while making sure that it's just barely sustainable enough and safe enough for them to get a return on their investment for safety and regulatory reasons.
So that's a really good point. I think it's very important when you're looking to purchase a piece of real estate that's going to be like your residence, for example, that you are not over leveraging. Because the thing is, it's going to lead to a massive reduction in the quality of your life. Because if you're spending all of this money that's just going into mortgage repayments, you're not going to have anything for investing either in additional real estate or in stocks. So there's a great saying from Dave Ramsey where the borrower is slave to the lender. And I think to some extent that's really true. So even knowing the bank might say, oh, you can afford to borrow this much, you need to think very carefully whether you are going to borrow that much, because it means that you're going to be spending a lot of money in repayments and interest.
So the method that I just described, the traditional one of finding out how much house you can afford, is gonna be a little different than the one you're about to hear right now. You're gonna think it's a little crazy, but I did this for cars, and in that video, I told people that they shouldn't spend on their car more than 1/10 of what they make per year. So if you make $100,000 per year, don't spend more than $10,000 on your car. And some people disagreed, but that's the path to Fat Fire, which is a way for you to have a really good retirement where you spend more than the average person at $100,000 per year.
Very smart. And also adding to that, please do not finance a car. It's a terrible idea.
These are the 3 rules that I'm following when trying to find a house right now. I'm probably gonna trigger my friend Kevin, but here we go. And the frugal way is this. It's following the 3-30-10 rule. And you have to follow all of these rules, and if you can't, follow at least one, otherwise you technically can't afford it and you shouldn't even be buying that house. Even if you can technically afford it, you're still increasing your risk, which is bad in times of uncertainty.
Okay, so in Australia, I can guarantee that if you live anywhere near a capital city, if you're making an average income, then you're not going to be able to follow all 3 of these rules because property prices are just so high. Unless you're making an absolute boatload of money, you're not going to be able to do this. But anyway, let's have a look at the rules.
So rule number 1 is the 3. Now what the 3 says is that you shouldn't be buying a house that is worth more than 3 times your annual income.
Okay, let's stop there. So the median income in Australia is $48,000. That means that you're looking at buying a house which is no more than $150,000. Now, what can you get for $150,000 in Australia? Well, you could get a nice patch of land out of Broken Hill in the middle of nowhere, and it might even include a house if you're lucky. But unfortunately, anywhere near a capital city, you're not gonna get anything for $150,000.
So, for example, if you're making $100,000 per year, you should not be buying a house that's more than $300,000. And I realize that this rule is extremely difficult to follow, especially if you live in very high cost of living areas like New York City or San Francisco.
Like Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane or Australia.
In some of those cases, it is literally impossible to buy a house that is 3 to 5 times your annual income. For example, the real median household income of people in New York was $71,855. Meanwhile, the median sales price was $632,271. That means the average family there was spending 9 times their annual income to buy a house. And that is after pandemic prices. When it was before the pandemic, it was in the mid 700s. That means after the mortgage insurance, the mortgage itself, and the property taxes, the monthly payment comes out to be roughly $3,000 a month. And that's after the 20% down payment, which avoids the PMI, which a lot of people would have a hard time coming up with.
Okay, so in Australia, we're looking at roughly 17 times. So if you thought 9 was bad, 10 was bad, in Australia, the median income to the median house price is about 17 times. So it is significantly more.
That means their debt to income ratio is 50% or more, and that's not even counting all the other potential debts that a person can have. So that means they are literally the definition of being house poor. So the moral of that story is just get out of New York City or any other expensive luxury coastal cities. I realize that if you love the ocean, it's not worth sacrificing your entire life and your savings. Just buy a house that's 3 times your annual income, pay it off, and if you love those cities, just travel there and go on vacation.
Okay, so you heard it here. You need to get out of Australia and you need to travel somewhere else.
Because otherwise it's a race to the bottom and it's not a race that you want to win. And rule number 2 is to have 30% of the entire home purchase price saved in cash. Now, all this rule does is it lowers our payments as well as tempts us away from selling our home prematurely in case it drops in value.
I think this is actually a decent rule. I understand that this might be a little bit tricky for some people, especially because house prices are quite high here in Australia. So 30% is great if you can do it. Obviously, if you can get at least 20, then you're avoiding lender's mortgage insurance, which is like PMI in the US, which you have to pay, and it's to protect the bank. It's not to protect you. It's literally throwing money away. So if you can manage to save up 20% and even 30%, I think that's a great way to go if it is your primary residence.
So 20% of that should go towards the down payment to get rid of the PMI, the private mortgage insurance, which is just a way for our lender of forcing us to buy into insurance so that we don't foreclose or default on our loans. But for all intents and purposes, it's literally throwing money away and we want to get rid of it.
Yep, so same thing in Australia.
The other 10% should be saved for miscellaneous purposes like protecting ourselves against the Llorona of 2020. And here's a perfect example. Let's say you bought a house that's worth $300,000, you put down 20%, which means that your loan is now a grand total of $240,000. And let's say at the current market interest rate, which is 3%, your monthly payment should be around $1,100 to $1,200 per month. But because you have that 10% of cash, which is $30,000, that represents 25 months or roughly 2 years of payments that you could cover in case the worst was to happen and you lost your job or you got sick, and that will save you so much stress because remember, recessions typically do not last longer than 18 months.
Yes, this is a fantastic idea. You do not want to be living paycheck to paycheck when you have a mortgage. I think it's really important that you get out in front of this mortgage if you're going to get one, and that is, of course, going to save you a lot of stress. This is something that we've done very heavily. We're so far ahead on our mortgage, which I'm really thankful for, and I think it really comes down to living below your means. Do not spend more than you can afford.
Unless it's 2020, in which case anything goes. Now, if you want to be extra careful though, then I would say to have 100% of the purchase price in what are called liquid assets. And that just means your checking account, your savings accounts, cash, your stocks, but not retirement accounts because those are time locked. And this just gives you more of a buffer. Now, I'm not saying that you should just buy the house outright in cash. That would be really silly.
Yes, because there's about 3 people that could do that in the Australian market.
In an environment where we have such low interest rates. So it's always better to borrow other people's money when it's cheap and then invest the rest. And if I ever saw that mortgage interest rates were at 4 to 5%, that's when I would prioritize paying down the mortgage, because that's a guaranteed return of 5% on my money.
Yes, that is a really good point. What we've basically seen for the last 10 years and even longer is interest rates have continued to go down and down and down. And of course, what's going to happen if they start to go up? You know, a lot of people aren't going to be prepared for that. So, you know, it could be quite damaging to the real estate market. So we might see things continue to drop. We might see interest rates continue to go down. Then, you know, it's probably a good idea to borrow cheap money. But if they do go the other way, then it's really important to start focusing on paying off that debt, especially as it starts to get a little bit higher.
3 is the most difficult one to follow, and that is to spend no more than 10% of your gross income, that is money that you make before you pay your taxes, on your mortgage. So this one is very difficult because for the average person, they're going to be spending anywhere between 28 to 36% on their mortgage. So to be at 10% or under means you have to be doing one of 3 things. You're either earning a lot more money than the average person, or number 2, you're buying a lot less house, or number 3, my favorite way of doing this is just to rent out a room either on Airbnb or to a roommate, so you can buy a lot more house than you can afford just by following this guide alone. And I made a video about that as well.
Okay, so financially, that is some very good information. Now, the thing is, he's raised 3 different things. You can earn a boatload of money, which is obviously a great idea to do. And number 2 is, of course, that you can buy a lot less house than you can actually afford. In Australia, you are not going to be able to do this. Sorry, that's just facts. But number 3 is you can actually rent out some rooms. Now, this actually might be very helpful in Australia and is going to lead you to being in a much better place financially. And I think if you're looking at this from a purely financial sense, then it's a good idea to be doing that, because if you take the median income in Australia, which is roughly $48,000, then spending 10% on your mortgage is going to be about $400 a month. You are not going to be able to achieve that in Australia, because it's like you're borrowing basically no money if you're repaying $400 every single month. So it might be worth house hacking.
Believe it or not though, there's another secret to how much house you should aim for if you can afford it, and that number is $750,000. But that's because of something called the HMID, the Home Mortgage Interest Deduction, and it's a way of allowing us to itemize and deduct the mortgage interest paid on up to $750,000 of principal on our first or second homes. So the way it works is like this. Let's say you bought a house that's worth $750,000 and you locked in the interest rate at 3%. That first year, most of your monthly payment will actually go towards the interest. In fact, your first year, you will spend roughly $22,000 on interest alone, but you get to write off 100% of it. So you would take that $22,000 and multiply it by your tax bracket, which let's say is 35%. So 22,000 times 0.35, and we get $7,700 that we just saved. And that savings continues throughout the life of the loan, and it gets smaller and smaller as we approach the principal, but still, that drops your effective interest rate on the loan from 3% down to 1.9%. In fact, there's a point to be made that if you're gonna buy $1 million house, you should actually wait until the year 2025, because then that $750,000 will be reverted back to $1 million, which means now you can write off even more in taxes. And the more money you make, the higher tax bracket you're in, the more money you get to save. But don't just go out and get yourself a $750,000 mortgage unless it's within your budget and you were going to anyway, because it doesn't make sense to spend $100 just to save $20. Now I realize that buying a house is a very personal and emotional decision.
So fun fact, in Australia, getting a house for $750,000 is below the median house price. Just think about that one for a minute.
And if it's anything that this pandemic has taught us, it's that maybe we should spend a little bit more money on the place that we're gonna spend a lot of time inside of, living, breathing, working, and smashing the like button.
Absolutely. I think that is really good advice that he's talked about there. Now, it's one thing to think of this from purely a financial perspective, and look, if that's what you want to do, fine. but somewhere that you are going to live and spend a lot of time, I think it's really important to factor in your well-being. And you know, for you, it might be an idea to get something that's a little bit larger. I know that for my case, that was definitely the case because I spent a lot of time actually working at home. So having a little bit more space was something that was fantastic for myself and my fiance.
But I'm guilty of this myself because the house that I'm looking at right now that I really, really love is actually $1.5 million, which is crazy. Does anybody need a $1.5 million house?
Wait, did you see that flex? Here's my flex.
No, but I want it, and it fills and fits within all of the criteria that I've laid out inside of this video. So when thinking about these rules, think less of them as rules and more like guidelines to help you with your needs as well as your wants. Because if you do follow them, it's going to increase your savings and maximize your retirement as well as decrease your risk, but it's not gonna make you happier. So regardless of whichever path you choose to take, just try not to time the market and think of being lucky, because getting lucky twice is very unlikely.
So a great video from Andre. I think that circumstances in one country are not going to be the same as they are in a different country to that. And I think this is very much the case in Australia. So what I'd say is make sure that your mortgage repayments aren't over 30% of what you are getting after taxes every single month, okay? So you can obviously spend a lot of money on a house here in Australia, but the thing is you're going to be paying a lot of money in interest back to the bank. So it's something that you really have to weigh up between space and size of the house as well as location to how much money you're going to be paying back and weigh that up for yourself. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I really appreciate you coming to check in. So make sure you smash the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps to get these videos out to more people so that they can understand a little bit more about stocks, real estate, finance, and all of those fun topics. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you later.